Crossroads Church for invocation.
Thank you, Your Honor. Holy God, we love Fergus Falls, and we know that you love Fergus Falls too. And so we ask for your presence and your help this evening as we make important decisions. I thank you for our public servants, Lord God, who give courageously and sacrificially of their time for our well-being and safety. I thank you for the people who feel so passionately for their town and so passionately want it to grow. Lord God, we pray now that you would join us together in those same values, that same passion, that same spirit, and that same love, that as we share different opinions, that we would be one in heart for this place, for its future, and for our life in it. Lord God, we pray for your blessing, and we pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll call this October 27, 2014 special City Council meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Cycles.
Here.
Rundquist.
Here.
Simpson.
Here.
Hicks.
Here.
Simpson.
Here.
Shire.
Here.
Rachels.
Here.
Fish.
Here. We have a quorum. Before we begin, this special City Council meeting is called to consider the historic Kirkbride developer's proposal. We will first hear from grant consultant Kent Madsen for an update, and then from developer Mr. Ray Willie, who is CEO of Historic Properties LLC. Council members will be given an opportunity to question and discuss the issues before us this evening, and members of the audience will also be given that same opportunity. The highest standards of decorum and civility will be observed by the council, staff, and members of the audience. I will enforce sanctions or dismissal for any deviations of incivility. The council members are reminded that you will go through and acknowledge the mayor's chair to ask any questions or to speak. And I would address the audience here, being we are in an overflow situation. We are required to only admit certain number of chairs, a maximum number, and we are at it. We are able to have standing room only, but we must have an aisle for access through out to the outside. So please keep that in mind. If you must be seated at some point, it is being televised on Channel 18, and you are certainly welcome to access that, but you would need to leave the City Hall in order to do that. But you are reminded that we are restricted in the number of seats that we can place. We'll first call on Mr. Kent Madsen. We did, yep. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'll be brief here to try to tee things up here. At the council's last session, there was an extension of time provided to the developer. The request of the developer was to provide information to the council by close of business on October 23rd, and also a communication to the developer that a decision would be made, a final decision would be made on their development proposal at this evening's special meeting. The staff members and I and Council Member Hicks that were in the special work group communicated to the developer the timeline of the information requested and the special meeting being called this evening. and then in correspondence that was provided to the council members and yourself and the media, outlined the expectations of the materials to be delivered. On October 23rd at about 4:59 p.m., I received a email from Mr. Wiley that said he would not be providing any information to me, but instead would be addressing the matter with the council directly. Over the weekend, certain of us received an email from the developer indicating that he would be present at the meeting this evening. And then earlier today, I spoke with the developer, and he indicated that he would have a packet of information for the council and would be addressing the council this evening. So I can report that I don't have any information to provide to you other than what I've just articulated, and I understand that the developer will be presenting some information this evening.
Any questions? Thank you. Mr. Willie. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Excuse me.
Excuse me, I just want to remind the audience, please turn off any cell phones, with the exception of our police chief here.
Yes, that means me too.
But I make that request.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the chance to come back and appear before the council and the public. We were going to overnight a packet of information on the 22nd that would arrive here on the 23rd. I got an email on the 22nd that created some pushback for me that I wanted to discuss. And looking at that email and analyzing it, I felt it was probably better for me not to send the packet earlier, but to come here in person and relay this to you in person. I got an email on the 8th. The 6th was the meeting, and I got an email on the 8th from Kent Matson, and had in there the RFP, and there were some handwritten things in there. There were several that were just clarifications, but there were one or two that were asking for additional information for the RFP beyond what was already in the RFP. I didn't think a big deal about it, and I answered the questions and went on down the road. But I got an email on the 22nd, the day before it was due, the day I was going to send it all, FedEx it. And there was a request in there for information that I could not do. It would probably take a week or more to do. And there was another item in there I'll address in a moment that was of concern for me, and I thought I would come and address it publicly. One of the things in the earlier email, in the RFP, when Kent sent the RFP, he highlighted on the 8th what was needed. One of them was plans and specs, and these are a set of plans for a 40,000 square foot building in Newcastle, Indiana. And these specs are 300 pages double-sided, and this is what it takes to do a historic redevelopment. I came here 2 months ago, and I stood at this podium, and I brought these items, because this was asked earlier. And I said, we really can't give a set of blueprints and plans and specs. We don't do that. No developer I know does that, you know. This right here represents about $150,000 for 40,000 feet, 200,000 square feet of the part that we would be doing. And by the way, that 200,000 does not include the basements, because we aren't renovating the basements. We're using them for distribution systems and so forth, but they won't be renovated. So we're renovating around 201,000 square feet in phase one. The estimates are around $450,000 to $500,000 for us to produce a set of plans and construction documents as was requested originally. So I came here 2 months ago, made it in person, and explained that, and I thought that made sense, and I think all of the city council members were here, and I thought it made sense. But on the 8th, I got an email for the RFP, and it was highlighted for, again, construction documents or plans and so forth. We don't have them. What we do have is and I've given this out before, and we have copies again tonight. We do have material that the architect did produce that shows a conceptual. It doesn't show it all broken down as to how we would do it, and frankly, we don't know exactly yet. We don't know exactly what the configuration will be of the rooms and so forth. That's kind of, as you get into the building, that's how you do it, and that's how a developer does it. So we're not at that point, but furthermore, we would never spend $450,000 or $500,000 and months of work and time without knowing we have a deal. That's usually step two after you have the deal. So I was a little taken back, wasn't sure what to do, thought I'd come here in person and again bring you this and show you and demonstrate. That's one thing I can't do in the RFP that the RFP requires and calls for. There's another issue I'll get to in a bit. We have packets that we provided tonight, and I'm going to give Kent Mattson a packet that will have some confidential financial information in it. I realize your expectation was to have this on the 23rd, and I'm sorry it wouldn't work to do that. I understand if you can't make a decision tonight, or maybe you want to. It doesn't matter that much to me. You may want to take a number of days to consider some of this and consider the confidential financial information that I'm going to give Kent. Or do it tonight, and I don't know. I'm open if you want to have a closed session with me there, or without me there, or no closed session. It doesn't matter to me. I'm open to any way you want to proceed. I'm going to leave some materials on the back table. This is stuff that you've already received, but the public hasn't seen, and these are just some items of buildings we've done and so forth. One of the things that is included in there is some items on Newcastle, and we're underway in Newcastle. What started out as a one building, 400,000 or 40,000 square foot building, we expanded. We've acquired a few more buildings. We now have 6 buildings in the historic downtown corridor in Newcastle, topping out at around 170,000 feet. When I was here 2 months ago, I mentioned this to the council, and we had 5 buildings. So we've purchased one more since I've been here, and so we're at a bit more than what I said last time. But it serves as a good example. This is the Chamber magazine, and this is one of the buildings that we finished there, and they did an article, a feature article on Bill and I about our projects in town, and I'll leave this for review. But this is the bigger project we're doing in town. I mention all this because it is similar to what we would propose here in terms of square footage, cost, scope, size, and quality. Not quite as big, about 170,000 square feet in Newcastle, about 201 square feet here. But I think it serves as a good example, and what else I think is important is I have 3 letters here from officials from the city of Newcastle: the mayor, the city attorney, and the president of the County Economic Development Corporation. And they refer to our projects and what we're doing in our working relationship. And they're pretty positive, and I think they're worth considering, but I wanted the public to see this as well, so I'll distribute that. And have that available in the back. The materials in the back, I would ask no one take them. There's just one of each, but if you want to look through them and look at it, I'd sure appreciate it if the public had a little insight of what we're doing and so forth as well. To recap on the financial pieces, I know there was a lot of discussion on the $4 million, and of course, the comment I have said, regardless of how it all transpired, we realize it can't be used the way we thought it could be used. And that's the end of that, and we have tried to find creative ways to help offset that money. We're willing to accept the building and hold the city harmless and identify the city in terms of, well, underground storage tanks or environmental issues and so forth, and accept it in as-is, where-is condition. And I think the other issues we are okay with that we discussed. There is a couple things I wanted to clarify. One was on the property tax exemption. I had a meeting this morning with the county assessor, and I got kind of a formula of how they arrive at that and what's involved. And I did want to clarify. I think the number was thrown out there, $7 or $8 million. The city, of course, has never collected property tax on that building. And the state legislature passed that initiative because they probably knew it would require, attracting a developer, so forth, to do something with it. Some sensible readaptive use would probably require incentives, including this type of a program. I would imagine a future developer, whether the building's gone or even if it stays, would need those incentives to do something there. But we got the formula from the county assessor, and based on the numbers, it's not based on how much you spent on the project. Of course, $41 million isn't all on the building. It's not all valuation of working on the building. That's part of that, but a lot of that is other fees, professional fees and fees like legal and interest and things. In other states, they sometimes do it on valuation of what you spend. Here, it's primarily done on rents. And as I mentioned before by phone from Switzerland on the 6th, our rents are low in order to attract the tenants and in order to implement the Section 42, not the 9%, which is competitive, but the 4% tax credit. So it's a marginal economic model. It'll make it, but barely. There's not a lot of profit in there. And so based on the information I got from the county assessor, based on what we think the rents will be and so forth, the amount of property tax exemption over the 15-year horizon probably will be around $2 to $2.5 million. Still a lot of money. But I did want to make one point of clarification. If we do that project at Kirkbride and we spend that money and we get that pass-through, the city will not get $2 or $2.5 million over 15 years that they would have possibly gotten, because that's what they're giving. But if we don't do the project, and if the building's knocked down and the vacant land is sitting there, the taxable amount of land, I think I heard a number of 450 or 500, would be a fraction. There wouldn't be any money to collect anyway. There's only money to collect on there if somebody renovates that building or builds a brand new, and they have to build it real fast and real quick, and $40 or $50 million or whatever to even come close to that number. So either way, the result's the same. Whether the city has a pass-through, when I say a pass-through, it's money coming from property tax, passing through. It's not city money. It becomes city money at a pass-through. So it comes through from the state and collected in the county. Whether that is done or not, the net effect to the city is the same. So I wanted to clarify that. It made it sound like the city was contributing $7 or $8 million, and that was incorrect. One other point of clarification, and this goes back to the email on the 22nd that made me scratch my head a little bit. There was a paragraph in there regarding skin in the game and monies coming from the development group. As you know, roughly, the project's $21 million, and roughly $10 million of that is money that we, Bill Brown and I, are borrowing and signing for. But I was a little concerned because the email stated it wasn't viewed that way. It wasn't viewed as skin in the game. And Again, 2 months ago, I stood right at this podium and I said, if I go down to Bremer Bank and borrow $10 million and set it on the table, is that skin in the game? And I thought I got an affirmative answer. Yes, maybe I didn't, maybe I misunderstood. But here it cropped up again a month later, 2 months later, that same issue. We are on the line for $10 million. That is skin in the game. That is borrowed money that has to be repaid by us. So in a project of $21 million, we're coming up with almost 50% or 45% of the money ourselves because we're borrowing it. What we were asking from the city is to contribute around 4% of it, which brings me to my final point, and that is the $700,000. We still are in a position where we need those funds, and so I'm requesting respectfully that the city would consider contributing just $700,000 towards the $21 million. And that's the essence of what I wanted to share with you. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Mr. Willie, you have given us what's called additional development information. Mm-hmm. Do you want to address any of that with us?
I don't think it's necessary unless somebody wants me to. And I could do it here, I could do it in a closed session, whatever is appropriate, or not do it at all. You tell me. I'll follow your lead.
Here, what are you referring to?
This document.
Does any other council member have that?
I think,
all do, yeah.
I think they all do.
Does Kent or Mark have this? Here. Your Honor, I guess I'd like to hear from Kent on some of the questions that Ray had on the emails. I'd like to hear his side of the story on that, and what clarification on his part.
All right.
Yep.
I guess, you know, we were here on the 6th, we talked about communication, and one of the things that we communicated to the developer group was the standing council or committee sessions that we've had, phone conferences set on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock would continue, and we've had 3 of those standing calls since we communicated to the developer the request for additional information, and city staff and myself were at all of those conference calls, and including the one last week, and the developer did not attend those. So if there were questions about the scope of what was being asked for, requests for clarifications, would have been a great opportunity to have a dialogue via phone. And I think the council saw all those communications. We tried to keep the council involved in the media as well. Similarly, we suggested if those times didn't work for the developer, we would make arrangements for some other times. Again, we needed to know if he had any questions so we could make sure that deliverables were known to him. In terms of the plans and specifications, I didn't see anything where we asked for full-blown plans and specs. The RFP document refers to conceptual site plans and building floor plans and the like. We didn't ask for a full set, understanding that those would come later. I don't know if that was, Ray, if that was somewhere in my letter. I looked at it, I didn't see it in there.
It says conceptual site plans, but it says building plans as the final product, not existing. We have existing. We've submitted existing and we've submitted conceptual. But the RFP says, in its final stage of what it would be like.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't read it there. It says conceptual site plan and building floor plans. So the black and white of the RFP is there. We didn't ask for this. On the email of the 22nd, what I had sent was questions that were being raised by the funding gap, and I asked if he would provide information that would explain why the gap cannot be met with developer cash or equity, since the sources statement that he provided didn't provide any developer cash or equity, but only showed borrowed funds. And typically, when you talk about owner developer equity, it's cash infused. It's not borrowed funds. Banks don't look at borrowed funds as equity. So we were just asking the question, as some people had asked, could the developer substitute that with cash? instead of the city's cash, so to speak. And then I just went in there to explain that if it's a $21 million project, the developer cash or equity would be about 3% of the total project costs. Again, relatively speaking, minimal in this day and age where banks are typically asking for a bankable deal to be maybe 15 to 20%. So from our view, to make sure it's a bankable deal, not that we're underwriting it, but to make sure that a bank would sign off on it, we were just asking what their contribution of cash would be. And I didn't use kind of the skin in the game term that was referenced previously. And then I just mentioned in the email that the city's contribution towards basic infrastructure improvements, the $4 to $5 million, that's about 20 to 25% of the developer's budget. So kind of put it in perspective that the city making the grant funds available for basic infrastructure improvement is about a quarter of the project budget. And that was a relatively significant contribution by the city or facilitated to the city. And that's in addition to whatever the tax exemptions would be. So trying to put it in perspective, the 20 to 25% was the question being asked. And then another question that hadn't been provided was out of the sources and uses, what type of development fee is in it for the developer? So what type of cash would they receive in return on a project like this? And I think those are the only questions that were raised in there. I guess the other thing I asked for was a copy of the market study that we had understood the EIC had funded before. I talked about that with Ray this morning, and my understanding from him is that the $50,000 that was transferred from the city previously to the EIC was used for, I think, professional fees and attorney's fees, and there wasn't a market study. So I think that was maybe a misunderstanding that there was actually a market study done, but the $50,000 previously from the city went to their professional and attorney's fees. So those were the things we asked for, is just an explanation of why cash couldn't be used. On the RFP document itself, I talked to Wayne Wazlowski, who has been our contact on this project with the state since about 2001. And I wanted to have a discussion with him about the origin of the RFP, because I think some question has been, is the content, the request on the RFP too onerous? Is it too much for developers to respond to? And the origin of that came from the state. It was a state-authored document in 2001 that the state used to seek developers. So the first pass of the RFP document and the various iterations of that have been used over the years, it came from a state-based form. And when I talked to Wayne about where they got it, he said it was used from the city of St. Paul or city of Minneapolis, one of the two, when they did the Sears Tower renovation that was used to successfully renovate the Sears building. So that's the origin of it, and that's something that the state Department of Administration says they typically use when they're seeking proposals to redevelop state-owned property or work with local organizations. So from his view, the information in it requested was kind of standard and customary, relevant, and would certainly yield the type of information that a local body would need to make a decision to make a redevelopment award. So that's history of where that RFP document came from. But again, we've tried to make ourselves available to the developer over these last months and try to communicate, and I didn't hear any concerns about the information requests until just today. And I received a copy of what Mr. Willie provided to you just now. So that's some information. I'm not sure, Councilmember Rachel's, if that's helpful, if you need anything else.
Very good, yes. Thank you.
Okay,
If I could, I'd like to just ask a question to Mr. Willie.
Shirley.
Could I take a moment to respond back? We were asked to put together to try and follow the RFP and put together a packet, and we do, and we have financial information and sources, uses, and costs of goods, costs of funds, et cetera, but as to some of the issues Kent brought up, on the standing weekly calls, they got to a point where they weren't working, they weren't beneficial, and it's hard for me to think that I could achieve something in a call when I came here in person 2 months ago and explained this in pretty dramatic detail, hauling this in here as to what was not needed or needed. And if it didn't work then, what would a call, another call, make a difference? it got to the point that it wasn't working. This, by the way, is no reflection on Anthony. He's been superb throughout this whole process. But it just wasn't working in there. And I'll mention one other thing. I mean, it was a heated meeting last time, and I thought it might be better to let things simmer and cool. And really had no expectation that a day later I'd get on the phone and talk. But when I get something on the 22nd, and it's due the 23rd, and I got to mail it on the 22nd, I'm not even sure a phone call is going to help at that point. On the funding gap, and back to the floor plans, when I read that as a developer, as a builder, when it says building floor plans, that's building floor plans. But the funding gap question as to why we can't put more in, we are putting the maximum we can possibly put in. We're putting $10 million. And again, I guess I would ask this question, and not rhetorically, but really seriously ask the question. If I went over here tomorrow and borrowed the money at Bremer Bank and I brought it in, would all of you consider that that is skin in the game? Is anyone that wouldn't think that is equity? If I handed the money and put it on the table, is that my equity or not? Anyone disagree with that? You disagree, okay.
And just to explain, Ray, the borrowed funds, it's a source to complete the project. I think we all understand that, you guarantee it. But the equity is kind of the cash in. So when you go to buy a home, a bank would typically want some equity built up.
You shouldn't keep saying bank. There's no bank loans involved there. And what really threw me, Ken, is when you sent me an application for Stearns Bank and under underwriting standards and said, follow this, that's what would take me a week or two to do. I said, what is this all about? We're not doing a bank loan.
Maybe I could just complete my sentence. So what we're looking for is looking at how much is borrowed funds, how much is leverage, and how much money you put in to develop owner equity. So the 3% piece is what we were just asking about. On the Stearns Bank piece,
I don't know how you calculate it. I know from a developer standpoint how all the developers that I know and have dealt with for many years, this is my 34th year doing that, they don't factor it that way. If a guy goes and borrows against his home, his personal home, and he takes a loan out and he puts that money into the deal, that's skin in the game. That's a real money. That's cash on the table. That is not borrowed funds. I don't know what borrowed funds means. It doesn't matter if it's borrowed or if it's out of a 401k, borrowed out of your 401k. If I borrowed it on my 401k, would that qualify?
so the point on the Stearns Bank document, is this an example of an information request on the type of housing projects that you've got?
It is not. It's at 9%. It's not a 4%.
I'm just telling you, Ray, by way of explanation.
Okay,
So,
but you gave me a document for a Stearns loan that number one is a bank, we're not using a bank, and number two, it's not the program we're using. The underwriting standards are abysmally different between what they are doing for us, a 9% Section 42, and what we're doing. So there's no bank involved.
Mr. Willie, Jay has a question for you.
Mr. Willie, the first thing I want to say to you is, I have no reason, famous quote, right, President Reagan, trust but verify.
Sure.
I have zero reason to distrust you, and I want to trust you, and I want you to succeed.
Yeah.
And you know, when you had your attorney here, I really appreciate you giving us all the information. I told you that. It doesn't, we don't want to be hard people up here.
Sure.
I want you to redevelop the Kirkbride, okay? The plans and spec stuff, that makes sense. That's a bunch of money that I wouldn't expect. This is just me personally. I wouldn't expect you to walk in here with a fully completed plans and specs. I don't expect that. The skin in the game thing, you borrowing $10 million, for me, is good enough for skin in the game because it's your money and your back. That's my opinion, okay? The third thing, the $700,000 is a make it or break it thing for you. Are you right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the fourth thing then is, can you, without telling me the contents of the study, there said there was another package of information that was disclosed that was some financial stuff.
Yes.
Can you tell me generally what's in there, even though I haven't seen it yet? I mean, I don't need to know the numbers and I don't need to know the whatever, but is it going to give us the kind of things that we asked for?
I believe so, yes, everything you've asked for. Our
Okay.
attorney, John Anderson, prepared all the numbers and breakdowns and, yeah, those things, so.
Okay.
Is there any question regarding the historic tax credits as an example, or any other HUD loans or any other sources of financing that we need to provide or have more verification of?
Not that I'm aware of. Now, I asked John Anderson those questions. He gave that information in response to that because there seemed to be a desire for more information on how those programs work. I don't think there's a lot of question, excuse me, to the state or federal historic rehab tax credit. That's a pretty common one. It's not competitive, and you'll get it so long as you adhere to the standards. I think the questions that I were sensing were coming from the HUD and the Section 42.
Other questions? Ben?
Mr. Willie, thank you for being here tonight. And I guess my question would be, obviously, I've never done a redevelopment of this size. I've never
Me either.
presented a RFP, but you have done dozens of projects of varying sizes in multiple different states. Could you just talk about some of the questions that are arising tonight? First of all, the RFP. Could you just for my knowledge, how our RFP process compares to some of the other ones you've dealt with in different states? And secondly, your financing model and cash versus borrowed fund, the whole financing model that you've had in other similar projects, and how that relates to this one.
Sure. On the second question, are you asking the information we provided, or I'm not sure I'm catching your second part of that question.
I guess it's just the whole, the difference over the cash, the skin in the game question. Is your funding model for this project different than the projects you've successfully completed in other states?
Well, it wouldn't be exactly the same, but similar. We try to bundle together as many incentives as we can to do a project. There's all kinds of them out there. You never get all of them, but you try and get as many as you can. And frankly, when we came here, we thought there's some good incentives. Of course, we thought there was a bigger one that wasn't to be. But so I would say every deal's a little bit different, and you have to see what's being offered and what you think you can achieve and secure by lobbying a little bit with the state, the federal government, the county, the city, maybe a nonprofit. You try and source all that. So I'd say they're all a little bit different, but there's the same players are involved. There's almost always a excuse me, federal historic rehab. Not every state has a state one. Indiana, where we're working, has one, but there's no money in it. So this one has one, and it's a great one because they buy it back. It's certificated. They buy it back at 10% or 10% off, and 90% on the value of it. So it just varies on the projects. What is different is the RFP. I've never had one so involved. Now, I will say this. I believe this RFP is appropriate if an entity has a extremely valuable property, and I'm not saying there's not value there. I'm talking about dollar value. If a community has a building and say it's in Manhattan and they're going to give it away or work a deal with a developer, that's a little different. This building has a negative value of 3-something million. So when we accept it, we're in the hole to start with. And the most recent appraisal, I believe, if my numbers fit my memory, the land had a positive 450, maybe something, 500, but the building had a negative high threes, I think. It came out to 3.5 negative, something in that range. So to have such a onerous RFP is unusual for what we do. We don't go into communities and try and get a expensive building. We get them for $1, and we then work to negotiate all the incentives to make it work. You can't make it work without doing that. So I've never seen one over the top like this, but probably appropriate for other uses, for other buildings. Yeah.
Council, would you modulate your question so that the audience can hear too a little better? Its sound is deadened in here. Thank you. Any other questions? I'd like to ask Kent if what specific kinds of financial data do we have to be considering at this point that we don't already have?
I guess, Mayor, what we had provided was what the council had asked for before. It's listed in the RFP document. Whether or not what was handed this evening meets that, I don't know.
Is
And we'll
that
have to
in
make-
this document?
Make a decision.
It
for
is partially in what everyone has gotten. The full will be in the one I give confidentially
I see.
to Kent. But as far as our understanding, yes, I believe so.
Any other kinds of questions that we have of Mr. Willie?
Your Honor.
Yes, Mark?
Ray, just for clarification, you had, and I just briefly saw it in here about a timeline, but it talks in months.
Yeah.
If you could clarify, I understand you had said before that based on your timeline, you didn't anticipate taking ownership of the property until probably late 2016.
Whenever the city is done with their work and all of that paperwork's done, and I don't know what compliance issues are there, and frankly, it wouldn't matter to us whether it's 6 months earlier or 6 months later, we would be doing our plans, blueprints, structural calculations, MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering, during that period while the city is working and doing their work. So we would be in no rush one way or another. I don't know when the city would be done. I've gotten a rough timeline from Dan Edwards, conceptual work, and then the physical work, then the compliance work, and the paperwork. But if all that happened by the end of 2016, then yeah, we would take it then, whenever it's ready.
Your Honor, you were talking about conceptual, I mean, what paperwork were you referring to?
Well, my understanding is that the city is going to do, with the funds, while they still own the building, conceptual work in the next few months, deciding what they're going to do, the infrastructure and all that work. Then they would do the physical work, demolishing buildings and streets and the sewers and all that. Then there's some paperwork that has to be done. I don't know what it is. I've just been told there's some paperwork that has to be done.
If I could clarify, and Dan, jump in here if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, but in relationship to the public infrastructure, we can do that at any time with those grant dollars because that it would be on public property. And so,
I see.
in theory, we could sell you the building tomorrow and we could still do that. I think the only issue that we had is you had previously requested that we demolish the administration building. And that would either have to be done while we have ownership of the property.
Right.
To use that, some of that $4 million, or out of our own funds if it was done after the property was transferred.
Right.
So just to clarify that.
Sure,
the
sure.
Public infrastructure, that
Any
shouldn't
time.
affect
I got it, yeah.
yours, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what the timeline would be to figure out demolition, get a bids, whatever you have to do. I don't know what's involved. Davis Bacon, I don't know all that, but if all that's involved, and then how long it would take to do the demolition at some point, then yes, we could step in and take it.
Yes, Mark?
Yeah. And the other question I had was in regard to the $700,000 that you were requesting.
Yes.
What was it your requirement or request of when you received that dollars? Was it required that they be given to you
On execution of the development agreement, in other words, on the front end.
on the front end? Would you object if the city made that a requirement of the project actually going forward as opposed to?
Yeah,
on the
that wouldn't
front
work for us. Some of these funds come at the back end. For example, the Federal Historic Rehab Tax Credit and the state one comes at the back end when you're done with the project.
Well,
Yeah.
Yes,
Your Honor, but I guess if you can appreciate my concern, we're talking about two different documents, a development agreement and a purchase agreement. And the purchase agreement is out there based upon, all the commitments that both you and us would be making in a developer's agreement. And as you had talked about, that this is rather marginal, that there could be the possibility that your project would fall through before you took title to the property, and we'd be out $700,000 and not anything to show for it. That's my concern, that my recommendation to the council is that if they're willing to contribute $700,000, that it be, not provided until the project is, you acquire the property, some work has been done, or it's dedicated to saving a certain portion of it or something of that nature.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the way we would want to go with that. We would like to see the city step up a little bit, and we would like to see that on the front end. We need it on the front end. And so we'd like to do it as soon as we sign a deal.
Other questions?
And you know what? You talk about risk. Yeah, there's risk. I mean, we don't know. You know, when we lay these numbers out, it's not a science as much as, you know, experience of doing these projects. You do them long enough, you get a sense and a feel for something. Do I think it's going to go? Could it go? Yeah, I think it could go. I think we can do it. I can't sit here and guarantee anything. And I wouldn't be here wasting my time or your time if I felt it was so marginal to the point of there was a severe risk on the part. But I guess everybody's got to put their toe in the water a little bit and stick their neck out a little bit. You know, I feel like we're doing our part on the front end, and the city probably should do a bit of theirs.
Mark?
And I understand that. So, given the fact that the city can use that $4 million for public infrastructure at any time, you know, my concern is that because we have to operate within the time frame that the state says, we have to do that next summer. And our risk is then not only giving you $700,000 and not having a project, but putting $400,000 in the ground.
4 million?
Or 4 million,
Yeah.
excuse me. And then your project not going, and there we sit with an old building that has utilities but no use. Okay?
It's a valid concern.
I guess I would offer the fact that we have effected a number of extensions of that grant money. The legislature has been eager to do so to help us accommodate a redevelopment project instead of a demolition one. And I don't see that there will be any change in their attitude that we should be stopped from going forward, even if it goes beyond that 2016 date. And so I think it's fair to say that I know our local legislators will step up and try to accommodate whatever our needs are in that regard. And I don't feel that using that drop-dead deadline, so to speak, is a valid concern.
Your Honor,
Yes.
Kent, do you address that for me? Because I think that you were told us that this is it. Is that true? Is that what?
The administratively, the Department of Administration went as far as they could go to extend that deadline. If you recall, that's what they did to get us to 2014. To get it longer, we had to go seek a legislative
Right.
solution. So the legislature extended it to the end of 2016, and they would have to do that again.
Yes.
Okay.
Whether or not they do that, we'd have to work in
Yeah.
coordination with Representative
Right.
Nornis again. We have set the record right now for unexpended bond funds, and again, as long as the Department of Finance is okay with that, I think the legislature would go along, but we'd have to try to tackle that next spring, I think.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's a legislative act.
I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Any questions? Jay?
I just have a comment to what you just said, Mayor. As I was talking to you the other day, just driving up the road past your house, and I said, it would almost be easier if we didn't have that money sitting there, right? It'd be an easier decision to make. But I mean, I remember sitting here talking, and before we got the sales tax put in place for the arena, I think you or Mark, both of you said, boy, you're not gonna get a sales tax put in place to do this. You really shouldn't even bother going to the legislature. And I know that Mr. Norris will support that and support trying to get an extension. I'd go testify to try to get an extension again as I did the first time. But that's not a certainty. It is, I don't believe it's a certainty. And I think we need to make sure, be really careful about that, because you got a lot of taxpayers that worry about that, and that's kind of always been my thing. I don't like to assume that kind of risk. There is risk that it doesn't get extended again. I don't know how large, and neither do you or any of us. But it's risk we have to take into account. That would be my counterpoint to that.
Anthony?
Mr. Mayor, I think one of the big issues we have is ultimately, it's not. I think everybody knows that there's a definite desire to rehabilitate the project, and I think Mr. Willie and his group have obviously can demonstrate that they've accomplished a number of projects, and obviously the Newcastle one has grown obviously to be almost the equivalent of what the Kirkbride would be, off the chute. But I think in many ways the elephant in the room is the $700,000, and I think somehow or other that we have to find a way because to get around that, and the $700,000 up front is a very difficult challenge for us, or for me anyway, because it's not so much that we don't exactly know how much money of that will be left. There's certain obviously commitments out of that, not the whole $700,000 granted, but as I think, as the city administrator said, if we expand our funds, then we've expanded them, and obviously, we just need to be in a position that we can put our hands on our hearts and say that with as much certainty as possible that the project's going to go forward, because once we've expanded our 4.1 million of grant funds, and we put it into the ground, into pipes and roads and sewer systems, and we've expanded that $700,000 that sits in the account. We have no more money, and if we go back to the state, then they're going to say, well, we gave you this money and there's nothing, don't come back knocking at our door. I think if there's we have to explore a way to help you make that gap, and whether that's how we do that, I think that warrants more discussion. If the difference between this project going ahead and not going ahead is $700,000 on a $21 million project, there has to be a way that we can help find that funding without it putting at the end of the day the citizens of Fergus Falls at quote risk, and so I think that's where we need to explore how can we bridge the gap. If that's our only sticking point, then it's an achievable one.
Well, I originally proposed that because of the $700,000 that are sitting in a fund that was initially or originally earmarked and designated as maintenance. And my premise was, you don't need to maintain the building, turn it over to us and we'll take it from there. So you don't need to waste $700,000 maintaining a building either A, you're going to tear down, or B, we'll take it and we'll maintain it, we'll run with the ball. So when I realized there was a maintenance fund, I thought, perfect match. And it's funds that really were given to the city. It wasn't the city's original money, it was a gift. And I thought, well, it's supposed to go to maintenance. I realize now it can go anywhere. But that was the original intention. Why not transfer or move it from maintenance to the other? So it's not like you're risking the same funds, in my view. Now, I do see where you're coming from, and yeah, there's risk all along the way. There's risk on the back end. You could get this thing 90% done, and it could fail. You could have an earthquake. There's a lot of things you can do. But I guess it's a shared risk, and everyone kind of inches out towards it, and I'm looking maybe for the city to do that with me.
Where do you wish to go from here? We have obviously some amended information that has been asked for, and Kent has specifically more information on the financing that needs to be reviewed. What path do we want to take? Jim?
Notwithstanding the missed deadline on October 23rd, I believe that the developer has provided at a minimum enough information for us to consider this proposal. It will be foolish and short-sighted for us to dismiss this out of hand. And I would vote against such a dismissal. Having said that, I don't believe that we are able to spontaneously, as of this evening, fully digest and consider all the information that has been given to us. This is such a large responsibility. The people of Fergus Falls care so much about this project that they deserve for us to do the best job we possibly can in considering this information. Therefore, I would throw this out there, and if it comes to a motion, I will make that motion to accept the developer's information as of now and consider it for the next week and make a final decision at the next scheduled city council meeting, a week from today.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Is there, or a resolution? Is there a second?
I would second that, Your Honor. I would just have
Ben?
a question about that.
Go ahead.
Would it then be intended that Kent would go over the financial information that's provided to him and just relay back to us whether or not that meets the expectations put forth? Or are we going to see that information ourselves, or how is that going to be handled?
Mark?
If I could add to that, I'd like to ask Rolf to give a ruling regarding the confidentiality in the Data Practices Act, but what I was going to suggest is that Mr. Loyley could leave that information with Kent, and if Kent and Anthony, who is the council liaison, to the group, if those two could review that information and report back, as soon as possible, if it meets the letter of the intent, I guess, if you will, so that you could digest that to at least some extent prior to the, if you're assuming you're talking about the next council meeting.
Correct.
We'd have it, we could put it on the agenda.
Is that acceptable?
It is, but Mr. Willie, the information you're going to provide to Mr. Mattson, I mean, you're deeming that confidential information
Yes.
at this point.
Yeah.
And you were advised before this meeting that if you give that type of information to the council at this point, and you ask the council to rely upon that information at this point, at this meeting, that would have been public information, because
Yes.
you were going to supply it to the council, and the public has the right to see what's before the council.
I got that email, it was clear.
Do you have any objection to what Mr. Seifert has indicated here, that Mr. Mattson and Mr. Hicks would review this information? You're okay with both of
yeah,
them
of course.
reviewing it and reporting back to the council on the sufficiency of this information? And at some point in time, this information, if it's deemed sufficient, I'm assuming you want it to be relied upon by the council, and the council can receive the information based upon your assertion that it is absolutely confidential. You do not want it disclosed to the public. They can receive that information in a closed session.
Yes.
And if they make some decisions in regards to your project, after the fact, it may become public. You understand that?
Everything but that last sentence.
Okay.
Run that by me one more time.
Well, in essence, basically the law provides that some of this information that is deemed confidential, and other information that is received by the council in confidence, can become public information at a later date once the council either awards a project or makes a decision not to proceed with a project. So the council has the right to review some of that information based upon the fact that, and make decisions whether they felt the council was making good decisions once they've had a chance to see some of that stuff. So you understand that?
Well, I do now. I didn't know that before. A few months ago, when I gave 80 or so pages of material to all of you in a closed session, I didn't realize that would be subject to the public. And there, of course, were some of the tenants, the restaurants, that we did not want to have revealed those people until a later time when they want to do it on their own time frame, their own media events and so forth. So I didn't realize that. I do now. I can't think right off the top of my head that there's anything that I would give Kent Mattson now that couldn't later be seen by somebody, but I'm not sure about the earlier one, so.
Okay, I mean, but you understand that. I just want to make sure at this.
I do now.
At the get-go here, that, I mean, then you're still comfortable with presenting that information to Mr. Mattson and to Mr. Hicks.
Yeah.
And you're asking that they at least respect that be deemed confidential, and once they make a determination on the sufficiency of that information, if it's determined to be sufficient, it would be shared with the council at a later date, or
Yes.
maybe even at the next meeting. I'm not sure
Yes.
when. Okay.
Your
Randy?
Honor, just going back to the time frame, had we received the
information last Thursday, or I should say if Kent had received the information last Thursday, there would have been time to have Kent to have done an evaluation.
Correct.
Of that information and assess its completeness based
Yeah.
on what was requested. And of course, you know, now we don't have that, and so I would support that delay that was requested. But I would also like to make sure that we have an assessment of the completeness of the information that we would have had had it been received. So that review that Kent would have done to make sure that we're not missing information that would be pertinent to the decision to be made.
Anthony and I typically have a time on Wednesday afternoon reserved for this project, so if that stands, we can certainly review it together on Wednesday afternoon and come up with an assessment in time of getting it with the council packet by Thursday.
And in the event that there's something, a key piece of information or pieces of information that is not in this packet, that could be communicated to Mr. Willie and that dialogue would continue so that assessment can be complete by the next meeting.
Could I ask Mr. Willie too, if your attorney is available on call from Mr. Mattson or Mr. Hicks regarding the financial information?
Sure, I can make that arrangement.
Anthony?
I got one other question, just coming back to this timeline and obviously to a certain extent, you know, some of the clarification of the, you know, the public structure and the selective demolition that would take place. You know, if those things were obviously, you know, making the assumption of that we're going ahead, how soon could you start the project? I mean, yeah, say for example, I mean, we can get obviously the prices for demolition and we could potentially start that maybe in the spring, or you know, so therefore we could probably complete that selective demolition relatively quickly, or not? Yeah.
Mark?
If I understand correctly, Ray, the conversation again before when we got the letter from SHPO was that they did not object to the demolition of the administrative building, and they would recommend that one to the feds. But that could not be done until they reviewed your full plan for rehabilitation.
Yeah, but when they make a determination of a non-conforming or non-contributing building, it's not impacted by that. What they really were saying is you still got to go through the hoops of, you know, submitting your plans and all, but it's not going to impact it.
Oh, right.
Yeah, in other words, if they decide that's non-contributing, it doesn't matter if you own it, knock it down, I own it, doesn't matter plans that are submitted.
But what I understood, and I want to make sure, is my understanding was that they don't have a problem with that, but that we shouldn't go ahead and do it until it gets signed off. Because if we go ahead and do it ahead of time, and then it jeopardizes the tax credits on the remainder of the project. So, you know what?
I don't think so. I think what they were saying is it doesn't jeopardize the tax credits, but you still have to go through the process of the formality of an application.
Right, and that's what I'm saying is that we can't tear it down until you've gone through that formality.
I don't think so.
But do you know so? That's my concern, because if we go tear it down, you're screwed.
I would say I know so, but I'll tell you what.
Then we don't have the money to tear it down.
Would you like me to get a follow-up from SHPO on that?
Well, that would help.
Okay, okay. Ken asked about something, but it had something about a timeline. But is that what you were asking, that written?
No, I think what happened is you got the letter from SHPO asking whether or not demolition of the non-contributory buildings, and I think it's in black and white what Mark is saying, that they wanted to have that submitted as part of your comprehensive redevelopment plan. So I think you should clarify that can happen earlier.
Yeah.
Because the letter, I think, does say what Mark says, so that would affect the timeline, I think, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, what I was meaning was obviously, you know, in the other discussion, we were talking about kind of the end of 2016, which seems quite a long way away. And, you know, if we could, obviously, you know, if we come to agreement and that's small piece that has to be taken down is not very much. It won't take long to take it down. Then, would historic properties be in a position to take possession, as it were, next summer, as in 2015 rather than 2016?
I'll get that clarified. I can say this, we've actually done complete projects without doing the Part 1 or Part 2. Part 1 is being on the National Register or in a historic district, and Part 2 is submitting your plans in advance so they can approve them. Now, I don't recommend doing that, and you're sticking your neck out. We stuck our neck out a few times. We just did it because we knew what their standards are, and, they got approved. So I think what they're saying is you got to do the Part 1. Part 1's already done there. It's on the register. Part 2 is the plans of what you intend to do, and the final, Part 3, is here's what I've done. And you show photos of each, and they come out and see it, and they sign off. So I know you can proceed and do it on the back end, but I get what you're saying, and let's see what we can get from them to clarify.
Mr. Willie, have you spelled out what the proposed timeline is for Phase 1?
Well, yeah, and it's pretty simple. As I mentioned before, we weren't sure when the building would be turned over to us. So whenever that date would be, 24 months, 2 years to do Phase 1. Then when Phase 1 would be complete, 30 months from the completion of Phase 1 to complete Phase 2. And those would be our estimates.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Scott?
Ray, I know this question's going to come up in the next meeting, I'm sure. Whether we go with you or not, the $700,000 will be on what time of the proposal? On the very front purchase agreement, I guess we'll call it, or is it?
Well, we usually don't do a purchase agreement. We do a development agreement that has the
agreement,
purchase
sorry.
in there, but however you want to call it. But yeah, it would be when we sign the documents, we have a deal. And that I normally would call a development agreement. That.
And you, at what time, what date, or what in the process would you like that?
Well, when we sign, but we would have to draft a development agreement.
Right.
That is mutually acceptable to our parties.
But in the next, before you start your project.
You're saying about when could we envision that happening?
Yeah.
Well, I'll speak for myself. I've provided a rough draft of a development agreement. And so I've provided that several months ago. Haven't gotten anything back from Kent as far as what they would look for. In one of our weekly calls, I mentioned, hey, if you've got anything to add, this is one that we've used a number of times. So didn't get anything back, haven't heard, but I would say it's conceivable that within a couple months that could be worked through.
Okay.
But I don't know, Kent, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure why you don't recall, but we did have discussions about the development agreement. And some of the provisions in there had it that wasn't as is, where ours proposal in the RFP was that it was as is. We've worked through that. So we worked through some of the business points in it, the development agreement. The development agreement that we saw didn't have purchase agreement components into it, so we'd have to add that into it. But I don't think we can, we've done a development agreement 2 other times on the property, so it's consistent with that and what you've approved before. Shouldn't have any problem getting something together that's mutually acceptable in 30 days from when you make the award. One of the things that we are affected by, though, is the Department of Finance agreeing to allow you to sell the property because it's got that bond declaration restriction on it. To try to mitigate against that, we got the appraisal to include both the value of the property as it is, as well as the value of the property, assuming that these buildings were demolished and it had a de minimis impact on the valuation, still was a negative market value. The state should accept that as an acceptable appraisal approach, but we don't know until we submit it to them. And if they don't accept that, then we're looking at 6 weeks more of delay to get the updated appraisal. But those things that are outside our control would really be the state's approval to closing the deal. And at a minimum, that's probably 45 days. If they add on the new appraisal, it's another 6 weeks onto that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? I promised up front that we would give the public an opportunity to comment on tonight's proceedings. And if there's no reason to extend the time, I will open it up. I would Those of you who want to comment, please step forward to the microphone and give your name, your address, and make a very brief comment, please.
Your Honor, City Council members, my name is John Strelk. I reside at 519 West Vass Avenue. Myself, I've been following the RTC since the state gave it to the city of Fergus Falls back quite a few years ago. And I want to thank Ray for being interested in our community. And there seems to be a big issue about the $700,000 when the city loans the golf course $200,000, $300,000, and then over a period of time they can't pay it back, and they say we'll just eliminate this loan. We also built a hockey arena that they didn't put a certain thing in there to keep the humidity down or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but that's going to cost the taxpayers right around $500,000. And anybody should know that you would need that equipment in there. And I read something, an article in the paper that they did it on purpose to keep it under budget. And now the taxpayers are going to be paying for that, whether, you know, after the fact, which costs more than it would have costed to begin with, I believe. So I guess to me, I see a lot of people hindering this project. I don't know where our city administrator feels on this, but I've seen over the years a lot of negativity towards accomplishing keeping our Kirkbride. I see more and more about tearing it down. And I've raised this question before as to, if you tear it down, what's going to become of the land? Is there somebody interested in that land? I never did get an answer on that. Anyways, I think it's time for the people of Fergus Falls, if we want to save this building, we got to step forward and put pressure on our leaders, because I see it going down the road for destruction. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is Rod Speedall. I live at 1010 Meadow Hill Lane, Fergus Falls, Minnesota. My question concerns the RFP. It's a 2001 RFP, I understand, that was taken from another source. And having gone online and really trying to get educated about RFPs, because even though I have a PhD, I didn't know exactly what it was all supposed to be in an RFP. But what I found out was that there's a lot of developers that won't even use an RFP anymore. They won't, because RFPs define things in a linear fashion as if you can know the future and you can give all this stuff. All I'd say is that it seems it's more important that the credibility of the person developing and the experience of the projects and the other things receive more weight. The other thing I noticed about the RFP is that in going online and researching model RFPs from best practices, we find point systems for scoring each of the developers up like 1,000 points. Okay, so my only point is, please don't use the RFP as holy grail. I'm not an expert, but many of you are not either, and many of you have not done this level of a project. So look at the ability of the developer in the past, his track record, who's on his board, and the information. And honestly, I wouldn't do the architectural plans for a house that I wasn't going to get to build. I built one here in Fergus Falls. I love it. And I've been a renter and everything, but thank you for hearing that. And I hope your deliberations are wise and full, and that we do have a Kirkbride that goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you. No applause, please. Or jeering. Anyone else? Anyone else wish to comment? If not, we have a resolution. Or is it a motion?
Motion to delay it for 1 week?
Yep.
All right. The motion is to delay decision on the historic Kirkbride project, Phase 1, until the next meeting, which is November 3rd. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motion is carried. Thank you all very much. Then,
Meeting adjourned.
there being no further business, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.